Hey there, guys. Welcome to another episode of the MH Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Miles Harrison, and today we're going to be explaining my current thoughts when it comes to assessments. Now, assessments are a part of every personal training business, or should be a part of every single personal training business, but probably not in the way that you guys think. When I first started doing personal training nearly 8 years ago, it was very much a tick box type of thing, in the sense of, right, we have a list of tests that we tend to do, and there's loads of tests you could potentially do. You could do things like the FMS type of assessment. You could go down the general route of assessments and yada yada. But the thing with assessments is it felt more like a task that I need to do rather than a tool that I can use to gather more information about the client in front of me. And that's the whole point of assessments. The idea of it is that after whatever the assessments are done, you have a better understanding of the person in front of you. Therefore, you can make a better process to get into the goals that they want to be. That's the whole point of an assessment. Now, the way I used to do assessment is they were very much like very passive type of tests. So we're talking about the ankle mobility test. We're talking about the Thomas test. We're talking about a overhead squat test. If you've ever seen people do that before in the gym, it's usually they've got some kind of stick, some kind of dowel over their head, and they're performing an overhead squat. Which, by the way, if you think about it, is nuts. Like, most people that I probably work with in the gym that I work with, I've never really touched a barbell, let alone do an Olympic lifting test, which it is. An overhead squat, even if it is a stick over the head, is a form of Olympic lifting. And that leads into the first problem that I have with standardized assessment is they're generally there to set you up for failure. They're there to tell you what's wrong with you. And I'm just not a big fan of that anymore now. Like, a lot of the times you just go to the client, right? You've got 3 centimeters of difference on this leg to right leg, and this right shoulder hasn't got much mobility. I wouldn't be surprised if most of my clients back in the early days came away to that thinking, me, I've got a lot of wrong things with me and all that, because that's what the whole point was assessment, to make you aware of the things that were wrong with you, instead of practically giving you a good starting point to work from so you can progress a little bit quicker. And the thing with these assessment tests is the result of them can change very, very quickly. And what I mean by that is, let's say, for example, now I'm trying to assess someone whether they can do a squat. They do a bodyweight squat and it looks a little bit hingy. So, for example, the pelvis starts moving backwards and forwards, the knee doesn't really travel over the toes, and the torso starts moving more horizontally. That can be easily changed by adding plate underneath a foot, because this guy in front of me doesn't understand their center of mass and how to manage their center of mass over their base of support. Once I elevate their heels, they can drop the pelvis a little bit more vertically, and they've got a far better squat. That's the assessment test in itself. That doesn't need a tick point. I now know that this person probably needs to start off with some heel blocks underneath their feet to get into the positions that we want them to get into. And when it came to things like passive tests, like the Thomas test or the ankle mobility test, like, they missed that bigger picture of center of mass, how they manage pressures within their bodies, because most times or not, if I did someone with an ankle mobility test, their ankles would generally be fine, unless they had some kind of like ankle history, like they've broken their ankle or something like that. Then once you pull them to ask them to do a more complex task, like a squat, which has more joints involved, which is generally a harder task than just putting your knee to a wall, there's a lot more things to organize. And therefore, that original test I have comes invalid, because we're not just testing ankle mobility. Okay, if their center of mass is too far forward to the point where they're just generally putting a lot of weight on their toes, they're not going to get a great deal of dorsiflexion when the knee's passing over the foot. They're going to really struggle with that. So by allowing something to go underneath the heels, they'll just sit back a little bit as well, which means that they can drop the pelvis a hell of a lot easier. And that's what I mean. If I just stuck with the ankle mobility test, I would be failing this client. I wouldn't be getting the information that I needed. And therefore, I would be spending weeks on end wondering why loads of ankle stretching exercises haven't fixed the issue. Because the issue isn't the fact they have tight ankles. The issue is far bigger than just something like that. So the way that now that I do assessments now is I pretty much just get you to do your training program. And the thing is with assessments is it doesn't just start and finish on that first session. Yeah, then we could do things like we could do photographs, we could do measurements to get a good starting point, but assessments happen all the time. Every time you step in within the gym, every time you pick up a dumbbell, a kettlebell, barbell, I'm always assessing how things are working. And there's so many variables that can change the mobility or tone or whatever you want to call it. Like if you're generally fatigued because you've just done 2 hours of football the night before, like you're probably not going to have the greatest mobility on it. You're probably not going to have the strength to do the stuff that we want to do. So, and not a lot of assessments can do that. But, which means that I can now change in real time, maybe the exercise that we're trying to do. Maybe I can add something like a drill to build a bit more awareness with it as well. Or we could change the exercise completely to give you a little bit more fighting chance so we can still push you and all that as well. So that's generally it, guys. I know this is quite a short episode of the podcast, but I don't think there's really much that needs to be said. The thing is, when it comes to assessments, we're always looking at stuff. We're always looking at how you are in real time. And therefore, we can make changes in real time as well. And if for some odd reason, like you are showing some form of level of tightness, a mobility issue as well, then we can start looking into some drills that might show, for example, a little bit of, let's say, a lack of internal rotation. If we got maybe a lack of internal rotation, therefore we pick an exercise that can allow you to gain access more of our hip. Therefore we can improve on that function. But yeah, that's it there, guys. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of the MH Performance Podcast. I'll see you all in the next one.